Hello, I'm Lindley Gooden. Welcome to Market Force's Customer Onboarding in the Digital Age webinar hosted in association with Dealflo. Now, in this digital era where customers expect a fast and frictionless service and experience, onboarding can make or break any customer's impression of a financial services firm, but the opportunities are also vast. From automation to analytics, we all now have a much greater chance than ever before to react quickly and turn a prospect into a very happy customer, all while unearthing deeper insights and reducing risk in the face of increasing regulatory and compliance demands. So we're here today to discuss how the onboarding experience will continue to evolve, what you need to do to seize the opportunities available from digital, and how you can tackle some of the problems that arise along the way. Before we do that, let's meet our fantastic panel. First of all, Ian Hood. Hello, Ian.
Hello.
Good to see you. Ian is Head of Digital for Fidelity International's UK region, part of the Executive Committee and also a non-executive director for digital agency The Unit. Now, Ian has gone from online sales, direct line, to head of e-commerce and leadership team member at swiftcover.com before becoming Chief Digital Officer at FTSE 100 global insurer RSA, which includes brands such as morethan.com. Ian joined Fidelity International in April 2015. He now leads their work to become a truly digital-first organisation. Good to see you today. Next, we have Philip Brown. Hello, Phil.
Hello.
Good to see you. Phil is Head of Policy at LV. He's worked in financial services for 30 years, with much of it focused on pensions and retirement income products. He's worked as a Senior Policy Associate on high-level projects such as at the Financial Services Authority and also being the Head of Customer Services and Technical Administration, managing the vesting process for a large back book of diverse pension and life products. Good to see you. Next, we have Emily Houghton. Hello, Emily.
Hello.
Good to see you too. Emily is Vice President of Account Opening at Barclays and started her product management career during her time at Tesco.com after a successful 3 years delivering an end-to-end redesign of the grocery site and kick-starting the re-platforming of the mobile experience. Emily moved to Barclays and her primary focus is to redefine the online onboarding experience. Good to see you. Last but certainly not least, we have Abe Smith. Hello, Abe.
Hello.
Abe is Chief Executive Officer at Dealflo. He's the founder and CEO of Dealflo, which is the leading provider of end-to-end agreement automation services to the financial sector. It's been identified by Deloitte as one of the fastest growing technology companies in Europe. Thanks for joining us, Abe. Great to see you, and thanks to Dealflo for supporting our webinar today.
Thank you.
Couldn't do it without you. Okay, over the next hour, we will be covering lots of ground, as you'd expect, and many of you will have your own questions and comments for us, so we want to give you the opportunity to put them to our panelists live. If you're watching us right now, send in your thoughts throughout the webinar, either using the Twitter hashtag, which is Customer17, or the question section right here on our webpage. We'll get to as many as we can towards the end of the discussion in just under an hour's time. So let's get started. When a potential customer gets in touch with you, whether it's in the branch or online, it's your golden opportunity to turn them into a brand advocate. So the onboarding process really is crucial in making or breaking the customer experience. Let's start by turning to the customer. Phil, start us off. What do you expect? What do prospects expect in terms of onboarding? What drives a good experience?
I think we've got to be really realistic about kind of where customers' expectations are set these days, and it's certainly not within financial services companies. I'd say that kind of the benchmark is the Amazons of this world. So the kind of experience you get on modern digital sites is what they expect everywhere, not just from the sites that created those kind of experiences.
Whatever somebody in the industry's references, our references as customers is our wider life, our lifestyle, how quickly, how well we are dealt with. So expectations are, Emily, are so important, and it's, I guess, the financial services company's job to put that first. Is that right in principle?
I think it very much depends on product set. We were talking around, you know, for me as a current account, I have a primary intention as a customer and I need to fulfill that. So make it as easy and quick for me as possible. And then we have permission to have deeper conversations about other products and services we offer as a bank.
Absolutely. And speed came out, before we came on today, speed came out as probably the top thing to get right. Okay, quality, integrity of data and so on, which will certainly get into. But in terms of friction and barriers, are they an increasing impediment? Is it still a big deal breaker for customers? What do you think, Emily?
I think it is, but I think it's also our responsibility to make it not feel like a pain point. So one of the examples we talk about often is if we can't identify a customer online and they have to go into another channel, let's make that as seamless and friction-free as possible. And if we shine it in a positive light and make that service really great, then actually to a customer it doesn't feel like a pain point.
What do you think, Ian, in terms of that? I mean, I would argue in some ways that friction and barriers don't exist until you're a bit fed up with your process so far.
I mean, I think having a slick kind of linear onboarding process is key. Having it, tagged up so that you can understand where the pain points are for your clients and your customers, so that you can improve things. If you have no choice, but some of the onboarding processes have to go offline. For example, if you've got anti-money laundering processes in place and someone fails that, you have to take them offline to prove their identity. And again, as Emily said, making that process really slick is absolutely key.
And automation into Abe is absolutely, we will get into a lot of detail and a lot of examples about this. Automation is so important in order to deliver a really slick, barrier-free process, but we're not there yet.
Well, we've made great strides, I would say predominantly in the upfront area of onboarding, which is really gathering customer data, but oftentimes when it comes to the crunch point, executing some kind of agreement with the customer, that's still an area where a lot of financial institutions could do a lot better.
Absolutely. Let's talk about personalisation for a minute. Personalisation, the big P, is everywhere, but in terms of onboarding, Phil, how are we at personalisation? What do customers, do you think, expect in terms of personalisation when they come to you, firstly, for the first time?
It's a really interesting subject because you made the point there about customers coming for the first time. They have to be treated differently to customers that you already know. And that reference you made earlier to Amazon is kind of a benchmark. They expect to be able to do things quickly, not necessarily too quick that it feels like I've just spent loads of money, because it could be a very big transaction, a financial services company. But it's got to be a process that feels like it doesn't feel Big Brother, so you don't know everything about them, but it feels like you've tailored a process to the need they're trying to satisfy.
Yeah. The principle still remains. I mean, we were talking about onboarding particularly today, but there is that returning customer issue as well. And I suppose in both cases, really, it's the access, the ability to process, the insights you get from the data they've already given you, or is out there for you to take in.
Yes, absolutely. And certainly with that existing customer, there is going to be an expectation that they will not want to tell you something you already know about them. And actually, that's an area where you've possibly got a situation where you've gone, we can automate this, and you haven't thought about, should we optimize it before we automate it, because we've got the data that answers the questions we're going to ask. So it's a question of getting the process of automation correct.
And Ava, sorry, a little bit of nodding there, because that process, I mean, again, an old analogy, putting the cart before the horse. If you don't get that underlying process, the principles that you're working to, the ideas that you're trying to get right before you automate, well, you're causing a problem for yourself.
It's a great point, and oftentimes when we automate an onboarding process for example, a bank, we'll ask the bank politely, as they're our customer, to really go back to the drawing board about the entire onboarding process, rather than seek to kind of replicate in an electronic format an onboarding process which was largely manual and on which they may have relied for up to 200 years. And sometimes that's a challenge, because you're dealing with some occasionally vested interests and often multiple different areas of what can be a large global institution. So what seems easy is not without its challenges.
Yeah, and without giving the game away at all, I guess you have to really understand the process that you already have in place and how you can improve it. And in broad terms, looking at the customer first, understanding what the customer wants before you start to automate the process. Of course, you've got the big iceberg beneath about the way the organisation works internally.
You do, but a process like this starts with looking at the immutables. What are the absolute musts in terms of the customer experience, in terms of regulation? And if you isolate those things and allow yourself to question everything else, you're just more likely to come up with a better, more intuitive process. And there are such huge upsides to doing that, as we've seen.
Back to the customer for a second, Ian. In terms of onboarding, what are the key pain points that No, not necessarily you've seen, but I guess there have been a few, that customers really feel on the way in?
Well, I think, a lot of businesses I've worked for over the past few years have to make a choice. And again, to Abe's point, how we tackle it at Fidelity is using the design thinking methodology. So what is it we're trying to solve? What are the pain points for the client? What's the goal here we're trying to solve? Yeah. And designing a process around that. But one of the key things is, do you want to sign someone up, at the beginning of the process? Do you want to, which I've seen, do you want to sign them up during the purchasing of the product or the service, which I've seen? Or do you want to sign them up at the end of the purchasing of the products and the service, each of which has its pros and cons. But I think designing that process that fits your clients and your business needs is absolutely critical. Having it linear, making sure that the data you capture is the bare minimum, making sure you're not asking clients to tell you things that they don't know off the top of their head and they're going to have to go and find out. Making sure that when they select a username and a password, that there's a balance of security and memorability. So don't make special characters and capitals and numbers and which your client is never going to go and remember. If you are allowing email addresses as a username and one's been taken already, and that causes friction often when someone tries to use the same email address and so on. So you've got to think through, I think, all of these scenarios, map them all out, and make sure that you've got a really slick process when you've done that.
And these are brand new to us. We can all identify those in the real world. So actually, yes, Phil, you were nodding there.
Yeah, I agree with what Ian's saying there. That, if you're going to reimagine a process, which is what you really have to do, you want to digitize something. That's not as simple as taking a paper document and recreating it on a website. You have to really start from what are we trying to achieve. And in that process, you've got to have the right people in the room. That includes people who work in compliance, people who work in audit. You need all stakeholders in the room for that process. Finance teams, product teams, everyone. And then as you're working through the process, I personally find it's really useful to have a kind of a childlike approach to asking questions. You ask why with such regularity that you actually get to the nub of an issue rather than just doing what you've always done. So,
it's a long meeting when you ask why to every question, but it is really good to help you to step back, isn't it?
Yeah. The other way is we're going to build an X. So what? Yeah. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. The question should be kind of, should we build this, not can we build this? Yeah.
Emily, from retail, Phil mentioned right at the start that we don't, as customers, relate really to, we relate our onboarding process to retail. That's kind of the way we do it. We might look at, there is a brand you may have heard of called Amazon. We may well look at that and say, well, that's what we compare it against. So what can we learn from retail?
I think it's just the common sense principles around, I think I touched on it earlier and we've kind of mentioned it and it's been coming throughout, but let a customer fulfill their primary intention, and then that gives you as a brand permission to have conversations after that are probably more relevant because you know more about them. Again, it's about offering products or services that make sense to me and my time of life and my status and things about me. But it's also, don't just blind, sell me things, because actually we found that looking at kind of eye tracking and loads of testing and data, customers don't see it. They're focusing on what they're trying to do. They're looking for that call to action, and they will do it, and everything else kind of fades into the background. So it's about being smart and doing it in the right way at the right time. And
the tone of voice or the phrasing of onboarding, for example, that can be really important as well. Just that tiny tweak to the way things are worded.
Definitely. And it can be the difference between a customer understanding what information you want from them and giving it, and therefore improving data quality, or actually dropouts or misinformation.
How's the industry doing in terms of tracking customer needs, changing customer needs, Phil? What do you think about that? Are we doing well?
Well, that's an interesting question, because our consumers' needs are vastly different now from what they were 10 years ago. And certainly in the retirement sector, actually what they're trying to achieve hasn't changed a lot. The ways they can service what they're trying to achieve have changed. And I guess from a technology perspective, historically, we probably haven't done it greatly. We haven't invested in the ways we could, and we certainly didn't keep pace with technology historically. I think we've kind of turned that corner, but I think we're in the foothills of possibilities at the moment. And kind of one of the conversations we had earlier was about digital identity. If we solve a generic's the wrong word, specific digital identity for an individual, and that individual can use it in multiple places, and suddenly it becomes really easy to identify a customer.
Yeah, and to that point, I think, from our experience at automating a lot of different onboarding processes, one of the significant pain points is identity. And within identity, you have a whole, if you're a large global financial institution, that covers a multitude of sins. Really, actually, you think verification. A big bank could have 30, 40 different kinds of verification that they need to execute with the customer, and ideally electronically, because there's no point in having an electronic signature process if you're photocopying your passport, which all needs to be integrated in the process. And in our experience, one of the most difficult things to do, to your point, is prove that it's the customer in control of a device. We can figure out that the customer exists, maybe. We can figure out maybe where he is or she is, but proving that the customer is in control of the device, that it's him or her that's actually executing the transaction at the time, rather than a salesperson or a relative, is a challenge.
The challenge is also, there is that internal challenge. A lot of people watching us today will understand and see only too plainly for themselves every day, the problems with systems and silos and culture and the way that people deal with the equipment that they have. But actually, verification, in terms of speeding up the process, which has already been identified as a really important point, automation would be there. Automation would absolutely be there. And I guess that would lift the people, the skills and the culture above, and help them to focus or be assigned to focus on customer need and dealing with customer for specific requirements. Automation, if you get that right, that makes the process possible and speedier.
Oh, it does more than that, I would say. Automation is, if we're talking, in the realms of onboarding, good automation can change the entire dynamic of the relationship and dictate whether or not the relationship exists in the first place. But once it does, it can also change the dynamics of the institution and the customer's relationship with the institution. It can increase the likelihood of the customer coming on board in the first place. It can increase the level of happiness that the customer has once they've come on board. It can increase the operational efficiency of the institution. But I think, moreover, in the times that we live in today, we've all seen kind of mis-selling scandals where the institution lacked control over the onboarding process because they were reliant upon individuals who they couldn't really control or evidence. Now they have the opportunity to design, implement and evidence the entire onboarding process such that it's either done right or not at all. And that protects the customer and it can protect the institution. So there are, the stakes are high.
It also allows you to innovate and come up with new ideas and offer them out and take them away and test and learn and become a more agile organisation, which we'll definitely come on to in terms of agility. Being agile is about the way you work. It's about the ability of the organisation to respond and twist and turn quickly, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ian, what do you think in terms of what needs to be done next to make this happen? Automation, yes, but is there a shift needed in terms of the way the organisation works together, in terms of things like silos?
Absolutely, yes.
It depends on the organisation, obviously, but
yeah.
In principle, yes.
Well, I think any organisation needs to work in this way. To me, working collaboratively, embracing and understanding digital is just modern business practice.
Yeah.
It's nothing special. Every business needs to work that way now. Our consumers, we're in a different world now where technology is driving businesses, is driving consumer behaviour. So everyone in a business, I say, has a duty to understand the basics around digital. One of those things is processes around how you deliver change. So now it is more and more important to co-locate people, to have multidisciplinary teams working together in short cycles, going through a backlog, which is just basically a to-do list of things for a product, designing those features, testing those features with clients early stage, building them, getting them out, shipping them out as quickly as possible, and testing them with real clients, and then iterating and evolving them. That's just one example. I could go on all day. I know we haven't got time for that.
But, we're bound to today identify the challenges. Some will be recognisable to you when you're watching us today, but others, the practical steps taken are complex. They depend on your organisation. They depend on your customer.
Absolutely.
How you reach out to them, what products and services, which channels they use, if you can define a channel. In terms of channels, there'll be mobile. There'll be particular areas depending on your business, your financial services organisation, that will become prominent? What do you think in terms of the big ones that will come up soon? We talked AI, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Chatbots.
So we've got voice is becoming much more prevalent. It's still quite an early adopter technology with consumers, but starting to actually use voice technology in your home to get information and perhaps balances of accounts and so on. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, culminating in chatbot technology, for example, sort of having a conversation, almost like a text conversation with a friend, but in this case you're doing it with what we call a bot, and you'll say something along the lines of, what's my balance? The chatbot will tell you your balance. You'll say, in that case, can you transfer £100 into my savings account? £100 transferred. So there's more of a dialogue going, using AI and technology like that, and moving away perhaps from some of the simple processes with regards to the web interface. So already we're seeing that could be shifting away from a traditional mobile or web interface to a conversation with a bot.
Absolutely. If you haven't booked a chat with a bot yet, you certainly will soon. Abe, in terms of, before we move on to a first poll questions, which you'll get a chance to answer in just a second, how are we doing in terms of onboarding, in terms of digital? Now that is a very wide area to look at, but what needs to be done, obviously?
In terms, if we're thinking specifically about onboarding new customers rather than kind of known to institution, we're nowhere near that. And I think, as to my earlier point, financial institutions have made great strides in their ability to take customer applicant data, to do things like assess creditworthiness and affordability, but oftentimes when it comes to the crunch point, to executing a deal in the form of typically a contract or agreement with the customer, and identifying the customer, people are involved. There are multiple manual processes which are involved. And for the customer, they're like links in a chain. The experience is as good as the worst link. So you can automate, the entire contract process. But if I've got to photocopy my passport or scan my passport, the whole process is broken. So I think really it's the point at which the agreement is executed, the customer is identified, which is still either largely manual or it's done in a way which is not particularly robust.
Yeah. Okay, so we have heard so far about how customer expectations and the landscape are changing, what you potentially could do next. Now it's time to hear from you. Let's run our first quick live poll. Fingers at the ready if you can. It's very simple. Just vote on your screen right here, right now. Question is, what is the biggest impediment to delivering a seamless onboarding experience? What is it for you? Just tell us your experience. Is it underinvestment in digital channels? Is it siloed departments? Is it antiquated systems? Is it compliance and regulation complexities? Get in touch now, vote, and we'll look at the results with our panel in just a second's time. But Phil, let's go to you. What are the biggest hindrances or the biggest hindrance when it comes to digitising onboarding for you, do you think?
I think it's that piece of reimagining the whole process. So it's not as simple as taking your existing 20-page pension application form or your 3-page banking application form and going, let's use this as a data capture mechanism. It's actually, why are you collecting that data? What data have you already got? Is this a brand new shiny customer or someone you've dealt with before? And actually working through kind of the whole process from the perspective of the user, the customer. Yeah. How are they going to feel about answering these questions? Are you using language that's intelligible to them? Are the questions comprehensive? Can they read it and go, I know what that means? Because anything that we think of as process can potentially become a barrier to the end customer. Yeah. We ask for something they don't understand, or we ask for a physical document to be copied and scanned in. That's the first moment you're going to get drop-off. And once you've got drop-off, they're not coming back.
I think to Ian's point earlier, there's a balance between asking the customer for commitment and giving the customer value. And all too often the customers ask for commitment because there are certain things you have to get from the customer if you're going to onboard them. Certain bits of information you have to get from the customer. But if the customer doesn't perceive the value of the transaction prior to the commitment, he's going to drop off.
I think as well it's about managing the expectation and being upfront. So I think we were talking earlier about I give you this amount of information, I spend this much time, and then suddenly I'm met with kind of a disappointing result. So it's balancing, talking about the minimum data set to be able to give a customer an indication of what they're going to get, rather than waiting to the end of the process, which could feel quite laborious, and then actually I don't want this product, I'm going to go elsewhere. And actually that's a very negative kind of interaction with a brand or a product or a service.
You have to really carry it through. I mentioned before we came on today about my experience with an aggregator site of no given name, where I went on this week and went for I've never used one before. I've heard, we've worked all with them and so on, but it's and the results of spending my time, my effort, my happy effort in going through the process and giving them extra information was pretty seamless, actually. That was pretty easy, wasn't too lengthy, but the results weren't any better than I could have got from the high street. And I thought, well, actually, that has turned me off that brand. Onboarding is so utterly important, and the results that I get from spending that time and effort, having the faith to go to that organisation in the first place, you'd better get the onboarding right. The results are in, I believe. So let's see what you said to us. Thanks for voting for us. There's another one coming up shortly, so do vote again if you get the chance. Let's look at those results. Here's the question again. The question was, what's the biggest impediment for you to delivering a speedy onboarding experience? The answers were underinvestment in digital channels, siloed departments, antiquated systems, compliance and regulation complexities. Right, and I've really thought ahead. This is what you're supposed to do when you're looking at automation and getting everything ready. And let's see what the results are. First of all, before I do, while the screen loads up, in terms of what you think, I mean, there are things like compliance here, which we haven't talked about. We'll get into that. What are the big ones for you? Emily, what do you think?
Compliance and regulation.
Right.
I think it's such a delicate balance between delivering a fantastic customer experience, but also we're in a regulated environment and we need to comply. So it's just a really delicate and difficult balance to achieve. Okay.
Briefly, Ian, what do you think?
Well, I'll say siloed teams just so I don't repeat. I tend to agree with Emily. Siloed teams, if you've got them, are a big barrier. I know a lot of organisations are moving away from that now, but chucking things over the fence from one team to another and then chucking them back again is a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely. Well, we kept you in suspense for long enough. The answers were underinvestment in digital channels was 21%. 1 in 5 of you thought that. More like 1 in 6, a bit under 1 in 6. Siloed departments was the least concerning issue that you found. Antiquated systems was number 2, just over underinvestment, which was 22%, and compliance and regulation complexities, as Emily thought, is number 1. It is a fierce requirement. It is a fierce barrier to get through. But antiquated systems, I've got to go to you on this, Abe. Just over a fifth of people thought that antiquated systems was the biggest issue for them. Clearly, it's still a huge issue, but I'm surprised it isn't higher, actually.
I think maybe the question belies the complexity of the answer, and it's a combination of those things. So antiquated, what was the second one?
Yes, antiquated systems was 22%.
I mean, antiquated systems sort of goes hand in hand with the ability to deliver a kind of smooth and seamless compliance process. You're trying to deliver compliance over paper with human beings. It is kind of difficult. So I think it's a kind of combination of those things.
Yeah, it is what's foremost in your mind, and I guess that's that. Compliance is always going to be up there somewhere, especially with GDPR coming on soon and so on. But Ian, silos was low. Again, perhaps it doesn't necessarily reflect the experience from day to day, or perhaps
Well, no, exactly. Like I was saying, I think a lot of organisations have moved away from that.
Right. Yeah.
Including my own. So it's not an issue for us. But if you do have siloed organisations, then I know there's less of them, but
and 14% thought yes, that's the biggest problem for us. So that's plenty. Underinvestment in digital channels. Look, Phil, there are so many things here, but underinvestment in digital channels, clearly the interface, the way that we customers interact, yes, it is always going to be a renewable problem.
Well, I guess that goes hand in hand with legacy systems, because that's one of the reasons that the systems are legacy, because of the underinvestment. So there's two different aspects playing together there. You add the regulation on top of that, and actually all three of them they're all part of the same Venn diagram. That's what creates the challenge. I think there's a lot being done on kind of modernising websites, but as I said earlier, I think we're just in the foothills of the possibilities at the moment.
Yeah.
And we've got to find better ways of collecting the data we need. And I take the point on regulation, But that's our challenge.
Yeah.
It's not the customer's problem. It's up to us to make sure that we are compliant and we're keeping them safe. It doesn't mean we transfer all of that pain to them to fulfill the process.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much for that. That was really, really useful to hear your points of view. And things are changing clearly. So it's really great to have you involved, and we'll get you involved in just a couple of minutes' time again. So we've looked so far at how the customer will expect more from the onboarding experience, and probably already does, and your thoughts on what's holding your organisation back. Let's now unearth the opportunities that digital brings for knowing your customer. We'll talk about regulation a little bit in that as well. First of all, the challenges. Phil, I would have thought it's a clear answer. Have compliance and regulatory requirements, including KYC, had a big impact on financial services?
Well, certainly they have, because they've changed over time. And as you mentioned, GDPR coming along, that's going to be another change for kind of how we approach and how the risk is assessed for that kind of knowing your customer and storing the data. But the biggest part of that is actually the fact the customer becomes enshrined in law as the legal owner of the data, which is a substantial change from where we are in perception terms today, that as administrators of pensions or administrators of bank accounts, we actually perceive it's our data. Well, from May next year, that's no longer the case. And that brings an interesting challenge, because in my personal view, not the view of my employer, my personal view, is that the customer then becomes the only point of aggregation. They're the person that chooses where the data goes, when it goes there, and who they give it to, and what consent they provide to other people to access the data. So it's important that we kind of really focus on that in the GDPR changes.
The thing is, we're a temperamental lot, but we're also fairly lazy. Would we really shift our data around? Would we make that choice? Well, potentially there'll be a small early adopter minority that would do that, of course, like everything. But it is really important, isn't it, Abe, to know your customer in principle. I mean, and so much of the regulation has moved towards that. But in terms of the process and the systems involved, it is increasingly possible. It really should be happening already. Are there problems in terms of what financial services institutions have to do right now to get that data in the right place, to join it up, to have it at the right place when your customer service teams need it?
For sure. I mean, anyone who's gone through a question and answer session in an online application form will probably understand some of the problems. The industry calls it knowledge-based authentication, but basically what it is the financial institution asking you questions about yourself using a bureau to which you should know the answers. And oftentimes, they're silly questions. So if I asked anyone on the panel, what is the amount of their monthly mortgage repayment, most of us get it wrong. And those are the sort of questions that are asked. That's a classic way of trying to establish who the customer is, or that it's them. And that's largely broken. There are ways of making it more elegant. But I mean, increasingly there are biometric methods of authentication, and to Emily's point, methods of elegant document authentication that can be used, and often in conjunction with each other, so that the whole process of authentication is appropriate for the risk that it's there to underwrite, whether a compliance or financial or legal, and also configurable and greater than the sum of its parts.
Yes.
And that we see less of today.
Yeah.
But that's changing rapidly.
We'll keep this for a moment. Safe authentication and verification, fundamentally important, Emily,
Yes.
and I guess increasingly so. But internally, you need to do quite a lot of work to get those figures in order and get the information at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, it's key, and I think having a collaborative approach and having joint accountability, so bringing in kind of the control functions as well as the digital teams that are using this capability is key, and all being aware of the risk appetite and feeling comfortable that we know we're using this technology. We need to be on top of the data to be able to know whether it's successful or not. And actually, we tend to have a real comfort in knowing that someone in a branch is authenticating someone by looking at a passport. But do we know the success of that, and have we ever measured it? And then bringing that data and comparing is going to be key in understanding, what is safe and secure for us as a bank.
What do you think, Abe?
That's a really interesting point. Are people good at authenticating other people? And it turns out not very. And it turns out there's a genetic relationship between your ability to correlate a photograph with an individual's face. And a lot of people aren't very good at it, including customs officials. That comes from a study of customs officials at airports. And actually, technology can do a way better job, way more elegantly. So, you know, and again, I think back to Ian's point, or was it could have been Phil's point, about not trying to reproduce in the digital world what we do today electronically. There may be better solutions.
Yeah. Ian, what do you think about this? I mean, this is, you know, it's fundamental. Certainly in the UK, it used to be, and this may not be true today, that verification, security, privacy were fundamentally one of the most important things to customers here in the UK. Now, that's not true of every country, but making that work without it getting clunky, without it getting in the way of my process, without causing another pain point, which it sometimes does, how much attention does everybody need to pay to that to make it easier?
I mean, there's several things to consider. So I think the first one is, to Emily's point, myth busting, that the post, the phone, the branch is much more secure than online. Which clearly it's not. You know, if you send something in the post, it can be intercepted. You know, you chuck stuff out, you know, the dustbin bin can go through it, or strangers, etc. So, you know, paper is probably the least secure method of authentication, number one. I think it's critically important to businesses and to their clients. You can't get this wrong, but you have to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So, if you're too overly concerned off the scale with cybersecurity and not making it very, very, very secure, then you're not going to get anyone to be authenticated, and then you're going to have a business. And then if you're at the other end of the scale, then you may be unsecure and you'll have a data leakage, and then you'll lose loads of clients. So you've got to get the balance right. And one of the ways you can do that, for example, is if there are simple things that are low risk, then maybe you can let someone through to see their balance or their account balance or what have you. And if they actually want to invest, maybe that's okay as well. But if they want to redeem and take money out, especially if they want to take it to a different bank account, then you might want to put some second factor authentication.
Prove it.
So I was just going to come to that point around graduated KYC. So I think if you look at it from a customer point of view, if I am a genuine customer and I, for example, may have moved to the country, I need to start working, I need somewhere to put my money, I need my funds. Is it an all or nothing approach? You're just telling me no, shut the door, I can't authenticate you. Actually, can we do more to help the customer whilst being comfortable that we're not allowing them, a £2,000 overdraft and they can pay whoever they want X amount of money? It's being quite a balanced approach and actually thinking about it not as a binary yes or no, but as a, okay, we'll give you this because we're comfortable, and as you prove or we authenticate you more, we'll give you more and more.
So how do you strike that balance with biometrics in mind in particular? Because Abe was talking about biometrics. It's really fundamental. Voice may be, as Ian said, one of the ways to interact in the future. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting that we live in an age where with a thumbprint and a phone you can buy a coffee and lots of other things you might want to buy. Yet we still ask for signatures on pieces of paper, and I fundamentally agree with you that a signature on a piece of paper or a face-to-face kind of conversation is not a risk-free option. So actually having a digital footprint that can be time-stamped when it happened, who's involved in the transaction to the best of our ability of understanding, who was using the computer at the other end, it is probably safer. And it's a little bit, I guess, one of the things you kind of think about, and if you think about the cybersecurity, the issues that have been in the press recently, and we have to make sure that we don't confuse data protection and data privacy, because they are different issues. But for that data protection issue, is it safer for me to have the data stored in a single place on a physical platform somewhere in one of my buildings, or is it safer for it to be cloud-based? And I think there's a perceived wisdom that me storing the data in a set of servers somewhere in the UK that are replicated somewhere else in the UK is actually the safest option. But is it?
Well, you'd say no.
It's time to ask you a related question with a second live poll. We need you to click in nice and quickly. Get those fingers at the ready. The last question was about biometrics. You can vote on your screen now, just below us. So let us know what you think of this. The question is, in what time frame do you expect your company to use biometrics? Not necessarily perfectly, but well. We're there now, number one. In 2 years, in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years. or never? I'd love to hear that. Vote now, right now if you can. We'll look at the results with our panellists in just a few minutes' time. But Phil, let's briefly, we've covered quite a lot of it, but in terms of analytics, you know, what are the strengths in terms of improving that onboarding process, if we can just filter it down to really key stuff right now?
I think some sort of data cleansing is the primary point you start at. That what data have you got? Once you've got beyond where am I storing it, but what data have I got, how am I using it, and how can I use it? Because I don't think we often ask the question, how can I use it? What else can I do with it? And actually having a really sound understanding of what you hold and how it can be used is the first part to saying kind of what is analytics going to deliver me.
I think even before we start engaging with the customer, the point of engagement is interesting in terms of analytics. So if you have enough data around previous customers, then using things like machine learning, you can quickly produce predictive models of who is more interesting in terms of a customer, who's less interesting, who's interested in a certain product, and then proactively engage those customers, those browsing customers who are more likely to want to do business with you in the first place, before you even use analytics to optimize the onboarding process.
What else? Emily, what do you think?
I think a big thing is about empowering everyone to use the data. So instead of, again, we talked about siloed organizations and siloed teams, but you know, as a product manager, that should be what I'm interested in, you know, first thing when I get into work, throughout the day, and before I leave. And I think upskilling and bringing people to realize the power of it and creating a culture where that is key, I think you know, drives the importance about the organisation.
Well, you've raised the question that we haven't really addressed, and we're waiting for your answers, so please do click away if you want to get involved in our poll. They're coming through now. Fantastic. It's open, ready to go this time. Culture, skills across an organisation. Ian, look, it wouldn't be a webinar live on air if we didn't talk about culture for a second. How important, how do you start to change?
Well, I mean, there's two things. There's culture in terms of data, an organisation, and using data, having the right skills, having the right tools and systems. So, you know, you need great analytic capability. You need to join your online data really well with your offline data. You need product owners, business people to know what they want to do with this data. You know, what kind of scenarios are they going to use with this data to, you know, make the experience better for clients. If your data doesn't tell you what you need to know, you have other ways of doing it. So session recording, joining up, you know, feedback with session recording, so real-time online feedback. So you need that whole rich kind of suite of tools, I think, analytics tools, and the people and the skills to do that, and an organisation willing with a culture that says, you know, data-driven, insight-driven experiences are better than, you know, ones that come up from people in a room who have got the highest pay, or for someone that's seen something work in another organisation and wants to bring it in. Now, those are great things, and sometimes they're required, but being data-driven and insight-driven, I think, is key, and having a culture that embraces and encourages that. And
there's really, there are plenty of powerful tools to bring the organisation on board, everybody in the organisation on board, but making my life easier, seeing in the real world what it's like to be a customer hitting that pain point, well, fantastic, and increasing numbers of insurers are dealing with that now, and it's fantastic. It's a great opportunity to really bring it to life. Your answers are in. Thanks very much indeed for writing to us. The question was, in what time frame do you expect your company to use biometrics? Now, 2 years, 5 years, 5 years, 10 years, never. I'm very happy to say, first, let's get it out of the way, never was 0%. Such a very happy result. Would have been fascinating. OK, so let's do it really quickly. 22% we are now. Very hopeful. Hopefully that's accurate. 30% in the next 2 years. That's 52%. 28% in the next 5 years. 14% in the next 10 years. Oh, hang on. It's changed. That doesn't add up to 100. 6% say never. Really interesting. That's happened while we've been talking. OK, really quickly, let's go through this. I'm going to start with 14% in the next 10 years. I mean, that's a long time scale. 28% in the next 5 years, 30% in the next 2 years. So between 2 and 5, you have a good deal of that audience. Do you think that's a fair estimate?
Maybe, but in some instances, if we're talking about the company, If that means the company that the customer is applying to during the onboarding process, the customer may not even be aware that biometric is being used. So my bank, for example, biometrically authenticates me when I want to do particular transactions. Even though I was told that it was happening, now it's just common practice. I'm not really consciously aware of it as it happens. I mean, in our business, we use biometric authentication to correlate a face with a document. But whether the customer really understands that it's biometrics under the hood is a different question.
Yeah. Let's just, before we go, love to go around with your answers, but that speaks for itself, really. That's fascinating. The 6% saying never is brilliant. I'd love to know. I'd love to speak to each and every one of you, but that's the way it is. Okay. In terms of GDPR and the next steps, what do you feel in terms of the progress of financial institutions, the financial services, because of things like GDPR? Is it without talking specifics, because it's very difficult to, that ownership of data, that the customer having in principle more power to transfer some of their data in principle? Phil, what do you think about that? Is it progress? Is it forcing the rest of us to listen to the customer, or is it just positive?
Well, I think it's both. It's positive, but it's forcing us to reframe kind of how we interact with customers. And I think the interesting bit of it is not just them taking that data, make a decision to move somewhere, but who they share the data with. In a market that's largely intermediated, actually it suddenly becomes easy to do a fact find, and it suddenly becomes really easy to analyse whether the product you've got is the optimum product in that particular class of products. So I think that it's the possibilities that come from it that really excite me once you've got that in place.
Yeah. In terms of automation, analytics, getting your data stored in the right place, Abe, what should people be doing right now before we go to audience questions? Yeah. What do you need to get right now?
Well, I think it's less in the right place other than being in your local economic area for GDPR, but it's more around the format in which the data is stored. And if you think about it, automation necessitates that the format is digital. And we've already discussed in this panel some of the upsides of automating the onboarding process. But some of the downsides are that all of that data on which the entire financial institution relies, frankly, for their entire business, is bits and bytes. And the bad thing about bits and bytes is they're easily changed, and it's difficult to prove that they've changed or not. So the question really is, how does the financial institution guarantee to their customers that none of their customer data not only has changed, but could have changed by accident or design? And oftentimes we find financial institutions are confused between what is security and encryption, which does not do that, and what is PKI and blockchain, which does do that. And really you have to think about doing that for all of your onboarding data.
We started off this webinar with a question about customer expectations changing. Well, actually, customer expectations in some ways have changed in one fundamental way, which is we expect resolution. We don't trust necessarily very easily. We expect a really good, speedy resolution to our question. Our needs, the products have changed, the details have changed, but actually our need is still the same. We want to get a great result quickly and more conveniently. So speed and access for me would be really important. Do you think that's true, Emily?
Yeah, I do. I also think it's a very relevant time to be talking about data. I think it is on everyone's minds, and I think feeling secure and educating customers on the power and the importance of it and that trust element is also key. So feeling like you can trust who you're going to share your data with is very important. And we were talking earlier about transparency and honesty, and having that obligation with the customer, I think, is also something that is going to be, an expectation.
And when I, as a customer, come to you, I want that firm, authoritative handshake to relate it back to the old world, but I also want to believe that I'm going to get a great experience. And so there is an underlying issue there, which is if you don't make onboarding the best possible experience of almost the entire customer journey, then you're not going to get them in the first place. Okay, we have, as promised, we've covered lots and lots of detail, and we hope you found the advice from our panel so far helpful. Wherever you're based around the world, we now want to share your comments and experience with us as we spend the last 11 minutes answering your questions. So you've been getting us lots of thoughts and ideas both on the webpage right here and also through Twitter using the hashtag customer17. Let's look at those right now and get our fantastic panel's thoughts and feedback. First of all, to my screen here, Shelley Greenwood from LV. A colleague. How can we turn a manual onboarding process with lots of checks and potential delays into a more slick, automated process without building in significantly more risk or spending a lot of money and time in development? We haven't talked about money. Who wants that? I could go to everybody here, and I really want to talk to Abe about this.
I feel as I have such a significant vested interest as someone who runs a company which does exactly that. I shouldn't be the one to answer this question.
Phil, I could go to you, but that's a loaded question to from a colleague. So, yes, money, risk, and just that investment. In brief, right, without getting into any trouble here, the speed, the test and learn, the ability to fail fast, move on, and to understand your customer and what they want.
Yeah, I think it's also, just from my experiences, you don't have to do it all at once in one, big, let's take this and just completely replace it. There may be things that, the company or requires still that is manual, but that doesn't mean you can't do anything. So it's looking at those processes and like we were saying earlier, thinking about doing it differently. Don't just pick it up and replace it, but actually, are there things that you still need? Getting everyone in a room to review it and say, looking at the appetite, is this still necessary? We've had this question or this process for however many years. Can we look at it in a different way and start taking things out of that kind of manual process and bringing it up front in the journey to then ease that off, and you start being able to kind of move in that direction.
And before we came on today, we talked about the level of investment, the huge investment that's needed if you go for a big project, kind of independent of everybody else. You spend a lot of money for years on this project, and it doesn't really go anywhere. Being able to be agile in its organisational sense, Ian, and Phil, you mentioned that point, that's really important, the ability to innovate, to take that idea, to understand what customers need. I mean, now you're spending less on each project.
Yeah, I mean, having a minimum viable product is great. So going in a room, like Emily says, with this particular example, what are the manual processes, mapping those manual processes out, then challenging each one of them. Does it actually, is there a legal statement in the regulations that says this has to be, a physical presence or send a physical document in or not, and actually challenging those, because a lot of the time it's just a perception and it's not. And can they be replaced with a digital version of that? So can you take a photo of it, for example, and upload it to an account? Is that good enough? And maybe do ad hoc spot checks. So really challenging all of the manual processes, busting those myths. And then, there's the business cases, isn't there? I mean, there's a business case that says, as things are manual, they're prone to error, and, what's the cost of the people that have to handle it manually and the errors that come in, and, is there a return on investment, which just would go down the normal process of, if there was a 1 to 5 year return on investment, you would pitch it to your investment committee and off you go.
Yeah, briefly, Phil.
Yeah, I'd go, hello, Shelley. Hello, Shelley. Apart from that, I think what you have to start with is when you're reimagining that process, you're not just looking at that tiny little piece of bringing the customer on board. It's the whole process from the first time you touch the customer to the last time you touch the customer. It's everything you do. And actually, I think we need to be a lot more realistic about what is risk and whether the risks we're carrying at the moment kind of increase or decrease because of automation. Because automation should decrease risks, not increase risks.
That's a great point. Oftentimes when we're trying to automate a previously paper process, everyone in the room is looking for a perfect new process, but actually the process only needs to carry the same risk as the previous process. You'll get the upsides of automation, but with no change in risk. If you do it well, our contention is you can have your cake and eat it, decrease risk, and get the upsides of automation. But actually, that's the real question. How does it compare risk-wise with the old solution?
Shelley, thanks very much indeed for that question. Really good. OK, Carl Tams. Hello, Carl. You're from the London Institute of Banking and Finance. Thanks for writing to us today. What fintech advances in customer onboarding do you think could threaten traditional players in the most in the market? OK, what are the new dangerous ideas out there?
We talk a lot about it. Well, I mean, I certainly talk a lot about it every day. But I think it's what they're doing really well, and it also depends on product type and the risk per product, because some of them are less risky than some of the other ones, so you can do less in terms of validation verification. But I think it's that really beautiful graduated KYC. It's getting the minimum information you need to give someone a product in whatever form it may be, and then they're in, and then they're with your brand, and they're with your company, and then if they want to do more, then we may ask for more information. And I think that fundamental principle is what is, killer for those fintechs, and we need to start moving to.
We haven't talked about partnering, about the ability to work with people as well. This is something we haven't covered, so this leads really nicely into it. Briefly, although we only have a few minutes left, that working together, I'll go to Ian first of all, working together, that freshens up the organisation. They have to work, of course, it's like any partnership, they have to work and understand exactly what you're trying to achieve and share that data securely and so on. But it works when it works well. Does that make any sense? No.
Well, I'm sure I can give it a stab. I mean, I think from a fintech perspective and partnering with fintechs, it's important. I mean, whether you give incubation space in your offices to those types of organisations, because the culture of those organisations, the way of working will permeate your organisation. That's really important. You might learn something as well, which might be useful to your business. I think one of the things I kind of observe is there's various disruptions that we look at in the organisation just to future gaze and to preempt what might be going to come along in a few years' time and that we need to be responding to. But financial data aggregation, I think, is a big one that some fintechs are starting to wrestle with, and pulling all of your financial life together into one beautiful interface, so you haven't got to keep going to multiple different providers, could be a big disruptor coming down the line.
Okay, we have two more questions which we have to try and squeeze in if we can. Karen McDowell, Bank of Ireland, how do you ensure that each new customer feels they're getting a personalised service with a remote onboarding process? That feeling of being invited, of discerning. Look, we talked about chatbots, about the new technologies, but right now, Phil, giving a really great customer experience.
That's a critical question, because everything you do has to be framed in the culture of your firm, how you think about customers, and the kind of tone of voice you use with customers. That can't be lost. So a website can't be a blunt instrument. You have to give it kind of a humanized sense when you're using it, and provide support when they want support, not when you want to provide it, when they want it. Yeah. So there's various different things you do, but it's about making sure that whatever the soul of your organisation is not lost when it becomes digital.
Absolutely. Okay, final question, Connor Smith from Barclays. What are your thoughts on blockchain being used as part of the onboarding process? Now, we've mentioned it already, Abe. Where do you see the use cases for blockchain in onboarding? Now, it's very specific, but in principle.
Yeah, I mean, it's less so it's less of an impact on the customer experience, I would say, and more of a downstream impact on how the institution, what the institution does with the data, how the institution stores the data. And so really, I think blockchain, PKI has been legislated in the UK and Europe as the kind of go-to place to ensure digital integrity. Blockchain has not been legislated, and it's questionable whether that's a useful approach to legislate about technology. However, blockchain has not been legislated, but it does a kind of similar thing. So I think what we will see increasingly is institutions waking up to the fact that all of that data must have integrity, and I think increasingly we'll see blockchain as the source of some of that integrity.
It is fundamental. Integrity is one of those seemingly indefinable but very definable parts of the work that needs to be focused on right now.
It is, and it's also one of those things that you only understand when it's broken, and you know, unless you've had an issue with integrity, it doesn't seem like it's a problem worth fixing, which is probably an attitude that needs to change.
Okay, well, I do hope that you've enjoyed the last hour and that it's given you some useful insight from our experts as you get ready for great customer onboarding in the new digital age. Thanks for taking part in the polls and sending in your valuable questions. We couldn't do it without you. Sorry that we couldn't get to them all, but please do, if you can, give us your feedback finally on the webinar if you have a few seconds by filling in the form on the right-hand side of your screen right now. We really appreciate your thoughts and feedback. But summing up, we've heard exactly how customer onboarding is being transformed, and none of us can afford to sit back and wait for it. The digital landscape does offer countless opportunities to reduce risk, know your customer better, and also to build and strengthen new relationships that last. We do hope that you'll be able to join us at one of Market Force's upcoming events that will look at the solutions in more detail. You can find out more at the website, marketforce.eu.com. For now, many thanks to our fantastic panel today for taking part, and to Dealflo for supporting the webinar. Finally, thanks to you for watching and sending in your comments and your questions. Until next time, take care. All the best.